project. Yeah, so you have some of the requirements for this project, and so let me see if I can pull that up. So if you're doing this one, you should already have the project set up from project two, and that one was just the first part of this. You should have just the basics, like the layouts for the most popular and then the highest rated movies. And so for this project specifically, you're going to be adding um, the functionality to read reviews and to watch movies, watch movie trailers. And so if you want to see, these are the features that you'll be having on here. So I can go over like just kind of step by step each feature and how to go about doing that. So for the first part, you want to be able to view and play trailers. And essentially, what this involves is the API that you've been using so far for this application has an extra endpoint that you can just tack on videos, right? And the videos you can what it returns is it returns all the different trailer links on YouTube. I go ahead and show that to you right now. So what I have is you have your networking class for Java, and so I have these two methods added on to the class. Just one for building like the trailers, and then one for getting the reviews. So it's essentially the same idea as getting the movie details once you have the movie ID, but instead of this one, you would just be adding, a different URL path. So this one would be video. So what I have on here is a string that just tacks on the videos endpoint and just adds that on and then specifies, that I want to get the videos. And from there, it should return a list of, all the JSON data that has all the trailer information. So what I did is, after getting the trailer, so on your detail activity, uh, you would basically just make a URL call, a network call using that URL, and you do that using async task. So it's the same thing that you would normally do, the same way that you retrieve like the movie posters and the movie data, except that now you're just using that URL data and then getting the string. So on the post execute, once you have managed to retrieve that JSON data, you can go ahead and extract all the different trailers. So what it comes back to you as, you have different you have different URLs, and these are essentially just YouTube links that that will just link you straight to the YouTube video for the trailer. And that's what I did here in this method called extract trailer data. You have the JSON link, a JSON string that you got from pulling the API, and from there, the only the so yeah, so I see a question in the chat says if we can make the walkthrough for if Joanna wants to send that link to that. Um, but yeah, so in extract when you want to extract the trailer data, um, you really just need two pieces of data. You just need the trailer name and the trailer link. And so from here, you can just pull the data from the JSON string. So you can format this any way that you want, but I just had a list of buttons, and I just had a different thing. So if you just click on it, it pulls up a YouTube link, and then it just opens the YouTube app. And the way that this is done is using an intent. So the way we do that is once we have the data from um, the JSON, then you can check to see, just basically create all the different buttons for each trailer. And so this is how you just create a button. You just have, and the key part is to add an on-click listener to that button, right? So for that click listener, all you're doing is basically just creating an intent. And the way that you do that is just you make an intent for the YouTube application. And so anytime that you want to open a new application in Android, all you need to do is just, write this parameter right here, just intent.actionView. This is something that's predefined in Android. And then from there, you just supply the link that you got from the JSON data. And so yeah, if there's no issues, you just go ahead and start that, and then it creates, it just opens up the link. So if anyone have any questions, just feel free to put it in the chat regarding trailers. But that part should be pretty straightforward. And then the second part of this project that they want us to do is to be able to supply reviews for each movie, and so those come in the same way as the movie trailers do. So each review essentially, have the user's name, and you have the trailer text. Same idea. So yeah, so what you want to do is the same. You're doing the same thing as building the trailers, except instead of using the videos path, you're going to be using reviews, and that's simply reviews. This is something that's defined in the API, and so you just tack on the reviews path into your URL, and from there you'd be just like you just return that whole URL. And using this URL, you can query the movie database API, and then make an async task, and then use that URL to get the JSON data. Once you have that JSON data, you can extract the reviews. And for this portion, you really just need the username and the actual content of the review. And from there, you just pull the each string out into what I use is like an array list, and I declared that at the top. So I just had just like a list of all the different things that you have from the query, JSON query, and then from there you can load, like, so yeah, you can plug it into the user interface for the application. So what I did is the way that you can go about this any way you want. You can either have it at one whole list, or what I did is I separated it out. So if you click a button, it cycles through each review. And so what I did here is I just had a little text view that has the username and then all the different review information, and then you just have a button. And so what the button does is it just cycles through each step of the review until it cycles through and it reaches the end, and then it just goes back to the beginning. So that's how you tackle the reviews portion. If anyone has any questions about the trailers and reviews, I think that's the most straightforward part. But if anyone has questions, feel free to ask in the chat if you want any more details. And of course, I'll just go ahead and send the link to the repo if anyone wants to see the code in detail.
Jerio?
Sure. What's up?
May I see your code again?
Sure.
Okay, so you're not. You have a layout and all that. You've already set those up, and you're just accessing those text views from within here. You're not like programmatically making those, right? I wasn't sure. I kind of got distracted with the walkthrough for Make It Bigger. I was trying to find that for somebody, but I was looking for the buttons to go to trailers, and I didn't quite catch that. Could you just throw that up there too?
Sure.
Your load.
So are you talking about the UI for trailers? So yeah.
Right.
Right. I'm assuming that you've gotten the trailer data from the JSON.
So here it looks like you are programmatically.
Yeah. So since the trailers are loaded using the endpoint, the API, you'll need to do that programmatically, because you don't know how many trailers there are going to be. So you want to do that inside Java. And from there, so what you would do is you would load the data using the async task. You query the API for the JSON data, and then from there, the JSON data returns the trailer information, And so there's a whole list of trailer. Let me see if I can pull that up. What it looks like. Actually, I can't. I can't go ahead. So a sample is. Let's see. The URL is supplied on this page. So you just do that. Let me see if I can get my API key.
Oh, this is being recorded, remember.
Oh, whoops. I'll be sure to change that.
I'll be sure not to use it.
Yeah, I'll just change my API. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, the JSON data is. I mean, I'm just gonna go back to the information. But so yeah, the JSON data should return you each trailer data, and so from there you just extract out the names of the trailers and the links to the trailer. So this is how the code should look. I see a question says, did your app ask for a username, and then you display that at the top. So how I believe you're talking to about like the review username.
Right.
And so where you get that from is it's also from the JSON portion. So that's actually part of the review section. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense.
Mm-hmm. So you would just make a request for the author of the review, and then you store that in a string, and then basically that's where you get the username from.
Did you limit how many reviews that you display? I see
No,
you
so
through them, but
so the way that I did it was I just created like an array list and added all the different reviews to the list, and then from there, the UI only shows one review at a time, and
okay.
then you just every time you click the button for the next review, it just cycles to the next item on the list, so
Okay.
that I don't have like an infinitely scrolling
Right.
list of reviews. But you can implement this any way that you want.
Well, I like your list or using an array list. I just was kind of wondering, like, how many? I mean, I guess if you're only talking about even 1,000, it'd be fine.
Mm-hmm.
1,000 reviews in an array list would still not kill your app, I guess. But
Yeah.
cool.
So yeah, so I mean, what I've seen, I mean, from the API, just for the purpose of this project, if you're talking scalability, I don't think you really have to worry because the API doesn't supply too many reviews. It only has maybe no more than, I don't know, I would say like 15 to 20 reviews per movie. So,
Okay.
yeah, and since it's all loaded like dynamically, you wouldn't have to store anything. It just gets rid of it as soon as you log off. You navigate back off the page. So.
Cool. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions about reviews or trailers or anything along those lines, or anyone want me to delve into more details regarding those? Or
I'm cool. I'd like to see how you're doing the database
sure.
stuff. I think I have it, but want to see if
See
there's
what's
some other way.
next thing on the list. So yeah, so I'm going to delve into the favorites then.
Okay. Cool.
So yeah, so the way that I did it is I have, you can either mark something as favorite, and you can, remove it, and then so over here, just add it to your favorites. So if I wanted to add something to my favorites, I can just click that, and then it saves it to my local database, and so I can go into the code that does that. So if you want to connect a SQLite database to an Android project, you're going to need to, at the very minimum, you need these two classes. You need, let me see if I can move this out of the way. You're going to need to, you have a database helper, like a SQLite helper, and you need like a content provider. So you need to implement these two classes in order to connect. So I can delve into how you implement the database helper first. So you want to extend this class called SQLite Open Helper. And what that does is it supplies you all the different things for creating and managing your SQLite database. So in order to do that, this is really all you need is you need a string. This is basically just going to be the file name for whatever you want to call your database. You can call it anything, but it needs to be a .db file. And these are all going to be constants, by the way. And then you need a version number. You don't really, I mean, for the purpose of this project, you don't really need to update your version number, but that's just, you need that just like a basic number just to put that for your constructor. And you also need, this is for later on, but you also need to just name your table, whatever you want to call it, right? And when you implement the open helper class, file name and the version number along with, the context, and this is also applied in the documentation for this class. But the main part for this this database helper class that you want to focus on is this query. You're going to make a SQL query, and that's essentially just going to create the SQLite database for you. And so in this query, you would structure it the way that you normally create any SQL query, right? So it's just like a create table, and this is pretty standardized. But you would essentially just create, so whatever fields that you want to store, that you want to tag to your movie. I believe this is like the ones that they wanted us to store, the things that are required.
Right.
Yeah, so you would just need your primary key is just going to be some ID. This is something, if you put as primary key in auto increment, that's something that you don't need to supply. That's something that SQL will supply itself automatically. But so you just need the movie ID and all these corresponding parameters. And so you create a table with each of these columns, and then essentially just call this method called exec SQL, and you're calling it using this database that you got as a parameter. So you execute the SQL line with this query that you just wrote out as a string. And so the second part that you need to implement is on upgrade. And you don't really need to worry about this. This is basically just for versioning of your SQLite database. But all you need to do for this one is just, this is where the version number comes into play. But since we're not really dealing with that, we don't have to for this project. You can just do drop table. So it just deletes the table and then recreates it if you ever need to make any modifications to the SQLite database. So this whole class as a whole, so you really just need it for this onCreate method.
Yeah.
And so you'll be using it in your content provider. And what the content provider does is it allows you to interface with your SQLite database. So once it's already been created, the content provider has methods. It's basically like a create, read, update, delete class. So as you can see at the bottom, you have these methods like, insert, just creating a new entry, and then query, reading the database, updating and deleting from the database. And I'll go ahead and step into each part. But before I do that, you have all these components that you need to put together. So when you create any SQLite database in Android, you need to supply some sort of URI so that it knows which database that you're calling, which table specifically, and the pretty standard stuff. So you need this prefix. Like this is never going to change. So it's going to be content dot slash slash. That's going to be like your precursor to the URL, to the URI.
Okay.
And then the second part is this authority thing. So this authority is basically the package name that you've created for your project. And if you're not sure the exact package name for that, you can actually just find it inside the manifest. So inside the manifest, you have this part called, your provider authorities. You supply that. So the content authority, that's something that you put in a string. And inside your strings, it's just going to be your content authority. It's just whatever package name that you supplied for your project. So for this case, it's just com.udacity.popular movies, right? But yours might be different based on how you set up your thing in Android Studio. So from there, so you have to append these two things together, and that's going to be the base of your URI. And the last part of your URI is you're going to just tack on the table name that you got from your database helper. So your table name is going to be, whatever you want to call your table inside your, so yeah.
That's exactly what I did too. This is right where I'm at. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So I think this next part will probably help you a lot more then. So Yeah, so once you have this part, right, so you the first thing you want to do is just so you want to connect, you have like your database helper that you got from, your other class. You want
Right.
to create a variable for that and then just initialize that, and that's all you're gonna do, and you'll on create. So if you want to implement each of these methods for this project, you really just need the create method and then the reading method and the delete. You don't really need so much update because for this application, you really just need to add and remove favorites. Um, so you wouldn't need to implement the update feature.
Okay.
And there's also another method that you just it's standard protocol for implementing content provider, but you also don't need it's called the get type. So for both of these methods, since you don't need them, you can just throw an exception, and just basically it says you don't need
Okay.
to. Yeah. So if you want to insert the a new entry into the database, the first part what you want to do is you want to create a new variable for the database, and that's just so that you can call the different methods that are inside this class called SQLite database. And so anytime that you want to do an insert operation or a delete operation, you're going to want to set that database to a get writable database, and this allows you to modify the database.
Oh.
And so you would call this method using your database helper that you defined earlier and set to a variable. So you just call that variable and create a new well, you just set it to a modifiable database. And then from here, what you want to do is you want to call the insert. So the SQLite database, this class that you have here, it has all these predefined functions, and one of them is called inserting. So if you look at the documentation, it'll tell you which fields, which parameters that you would need to insert. But so all you need to do is in the insert method for this class, you actually have these content values, these values parameters, and so that's going to be whatever data that you have supplied. I can show that in a little bit.
Okay.
I'm just going to walk through this method first. So these values, you're just going to plug that into this insert thing. So a lot of these methods, these operations are actually really abstracted out. So it really does a lot of the legwork for you. You just have to be able to call them. You just have to just plug and supply the data from your application. So the two parts you're going to need is just the values that you get from the method signature, as well as the table name, which table that you want to insert it into. And then from there, so essentially you're just gonna do this part right here. So this part is this if block. It's just gonna check if it successfully inserted into the database or not. So if it did, so you're just gonna call this method right here, and essentially what that does is just it just notifies to the underlying system that hey, it's everything's good, and that we just managed to insert it successfully. And so these methods. So where do you get these values from? Like this values parameter. So that's going to be inside your class when you implement. So on the on-click listener that you put inside the UI. So when you put like in this button right here, you have an on-click listener that checks when every time that you click the button. And so every time you click that button, the click listener is going to trigger this method to occur. So where that happens in your this activity for this activity class right here, you have a portion whenever you're just loading the user interface. Whenever you plug everything in and you create the button that allows you to add favorites, you'd essentially just add a click listener. Let me see if I can find that. I'm not so sure where I can. Yeah, so right here. So you have a favorite button, right? And so what I did here is basically this first part, it just checks if the favorite's already there. If it's not, then basically, it's just going to show you whether it's marked or not. But this is where you would indicate how to insert and delete the movie from your database. So from here, what I do is you see right here, if you can check. So this is for deleting, and this part, if the favorite already does exist, it would delete the entry inside from the database. And then the else block, what it does is it would insert it into the database. And so what you want to do is it's pretty simple actually. So you just create a new variable of the content values class, and then you just initialize that, right? And in the content values class, it has this function called put, and all that does is you just put whatever fields that you want to add to your database, right? So all the different fields that we had when we created our database, like the movie ID and the title, all those fields, you would basically just have a key. So this string, this first part right here says a string that indicates what to look for when it does pull the data from the content values.
Uh-huh.
And then the second part right here is the actual value of the data that you want to insert. So it's the same thing as if you want to, it's like the key value pairs
Key
basically.
value. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you just, so you put
And
these
not,
sorry, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. And you made the column movie ID, for instance. That's an integer that is the column in the table, right? And then you're putting the data into that column.
Yeah, pretty
Right.
much.
Okay.
So this part right here, where I'm getting this from, this column movie ID, it's basically just a string inside your favorites provider that says ID.
Okay.
So this is going to be the header of the column inside the SQLite database.
Okay.
Yeah. So the reason I put that is just so that it knows which column to insert it into
Yeah.
when I do that. So I put that. It's just a string that says, hey, this is the data that is going to be inserted into the movie ID, and then hey, this is going to be the data that's going to be inserted into the title. So what you do is you just insert all of these data into the content values portion right here. So now what you have is a content values variable that has all the data that you want to insert for this one entry into the database, right? And so once you have that, you're basically just going to call the content resolver class. That's basically just this system's it's just like something that connects to the content provider, and then you're going to call the insert method. Whoops, hold on. So you're going to call the insert method, and what that is, it's going to be calling this insert method right here, and so it's gonna am I right? Yeah. So it called this insert, and so the two things that you want to put are, first of all, you want to have the URI of so that's going to be the content dot slash slash com.udacity whatever, and then with the table name, and then the second part is going to be these content values that you just created over here. Ooh. Can you guys still hear me?
I can.
Okay, yeah. For a second, I think something went off. So this essentially just calls that method that you defined inside your content provider, and so this insert method right here is going to take two parameters. It's going to take your URI and going to take the value. So what it does, it just it's been abstracted out so much that you just put these two things and it does it automatically for you. So once you've done this, once you've written this line right here, it's gonna insert the thing into the database for you. And this is just for UI elements right here. So every time that you insert it, it's just gonna change the color of the text to yellow just to indicate that you've marked it as a favorite. So that's for inserting. Do you need extra permissions? Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and show you my Android manifest. So this is all it looks like. So the only permissions that you really need is just the internet permission. This is just for connecting the to make the queries to the API. But what you do need is you need to specify the content provider right here. So you need to add that inside your application scope right here, and you just need to and just indicate that the content authority, and the content authority is what you wrote, the com.udacity dot, whatever you called your package for this project. And then essentially then this name right here is you're gonna just basically just call the class for your content provider. So it says .data, and so the reason I put .data right here is because in my project directory I have it put in like this data folder. But essentially what you need to do is you're gonna have in the name, you're gonna just specify what the name of your class for your content provider is. So once you've done this, it allows you to use that content provider as the one for your project. I hope that clears that up. So yeah, so that's for inserting into the database, and for deleting, it's really the same thing. So for deleting, you're just going to create, you're going to create another variable for the SQLite database and make it indicate that you want to write to it, just using this get writable database. And then, so what you want to do is this part right here, this part that says if, that's just like, that's pretty standard code for if you want to just check if there's anything to delete. And so this selection right here, you get that from here. So the selection is basically what you want to delete, right? And I can go ahead and show that how that works in the context of the application later on once I go back to the detailed code. But this is just something that you want to add just in case that you're not actually deleting anything. And the one just basically means you're not deleting anything from the database. But what you'll be doing here is you call the delete method, and it's the same thing as inserting. So you just specify the table name and then the selection. So you're basically just taking these two things right here, the selection arguments from the method signature. And so you set that to an integer, and what the integer represents is the number of the database that was deleted from the database. And this part right here is just going to notify that, hey, something was changed. We managed to successfully delete the database. So not the database, but the entry in the database. So when you call this method, I'll show you how you call this method. So inside the detail activity, so as you saw earlier, so this part right here was to insert it. So this part is to delete from the database. And so what I did is I just used like this. It's a SQL query. It's basically just specifying where the ID, just to find the match in the ID. So you just put whatever the movie ID is, and then so this one you're getting it from the current. You're pulling it from the database, and then this MID is the thing that for the current movie that you're looking at. In this current activity. So let's say if I were to be in this, for this movie specifically, I'm going to get this movie's movie ID and then check in the database where this ID exists. And then once I found that entry inside the database, you're going to call the .delete method from your content provider. And then you're going to supply, basically the URI is just, that this delete from this table. And then this parameter right here is just to say that, hey, wherever inside this database that you find the movie ID to be equal to this, go ahead and that's the entry that I want. So this is what you want to add. You just want to specify that. So that would be your selection right here. So earlier, and I showed you the content provider where it says, selection. That's what your selection is going to be. It's basically going to be a string that says what you're looking for to delete. And then for the selection arguments, you really just don't have to worry about that. That won't do anything for you for this project. So so that's all you need to do is you need to just call the delete method and supply the parameters. So in this specific scenario, you're saying that to look for this ID specifically, but anything you can do in SQL, you can just go ahead and do that. If you want to go ahead and try to delete something, So the remainder of this if block is just, anything that you want to update to the UI. So it's just to remove something, it's just going to handle that part. So that's for inserting and delete. Do I have any questions for those parts so far? Or is anyone clear about that? Or if not, I can move on to the other part of this um, content provider, which is querying the database. So the query is just to see, just return anything that exists inside the database. And this part is actually used, if you saw earlier, we have this part called favorite exists. And so before we want to insert or delete anything into the database, we want to check if it's inside the database or not. So this favorite exists part, it's a separate method right here that I wrote out. And it just checks if something is inside the database using the query method. So how you implement that is, so this is a little something different from the insert and delete. You have this thing called a cursor. And the cursor, it's a predefined class in the Android library. And so it just indicates where in the database that a specific entry is going to be, right? So for your cursor, you want to set that to, so instead of getting a writable database, you're going to want to do a readable database. And so all these things that you populate into the query method, these things you're just going to be pulling it from the method signature. A lot of them you actually won't really need, but what you actually will need, I'll show you later when we do make the call to this method. But essentially, you're just doing the same stuff. You're querying, and the only thing that you're actually going to make unique is the table name that you supplied in your database helper. And so from here, you just follow the documentation to plug in each of these different pieces into the method. And then this part right here, so it's just the same thing. It's just going to indicate that, that something was queried from the database. And so when we want to call this method, so what we do is we just create a new cursor class, a new cursor variable. And the only thing you actually need is just going to be this URI. And then this URI, it's just going to be, the indication of what table it is. And so when you do this in your favorite exists, so what this does is it just checks if your cursor was returned successfully. And then this thing called cursor move to first, it just allows you to to just initialize your cursor to move it to like the first part of the database so you can start iterating through. And so I have a while loop here, and what it does is it goes through the entire database, and it goes through and it doesn't stop until it reaches the end, which is what this this method right here is. And so what it does when it loops through, it just checks for this ID that you want to define. So if you want to look for an ID inside the database, you supply that inside the method. I'm looking for this movie ID that I want to see if it's inside the database. And so you iterate through each part of the database, and then you get, how you do that is you just get the column index. You call this method get column index, and you supply that I want to get the column that says movie ID. So what it does in each iteration of the loop is it gets whatever is plugged into the movie ID column for that specific entry. And then you're going to do a comparison to see if that movie ID that you got from this entry matches the ID that you're looking for. And at any point of time in this loop, that if you do find a movie ID that matches, that means that it does exist in the database. And so you're going to return true. And if you go through this entire loop and you didn't manage to find a match, that means the movie is not inside, so it's going to return false. So that's what this method is doing. This is not something that is a boilerplate. It's something you have to define on your own. But so this allows me to check if something's in the database. And so I use this method throughout this entire class to check if anything, to allow me to find and see if something exists. So that's what allows me to do the check and see before I do my insert and delete operation to see if I have something in the database. And so if there is something inside the database, then I'm going to go ahead and delete that. If it's not in the database, I can go ahead and insert that. So that's how I implemented the the SQLite database. Does anyone any questions about that so far?
Yeah, I'm good. That was pretty straightforward. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. And once again, the code is all I put a repo inside the chat. So if anyone wants to take a closer look, I know that was a pretty quick overview of how to do that. But if you want to take a closer look at the code and see the implementation details, the repo is right there.
And this will be this is recorded too, right?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, everyone can see my API key.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
We've all got our own.
Yeah. And I'll see if anything starts spiking up, and I'll know if someone's using my.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's essentially covers most of the things. So you can change the favorites, and then you can create the database. So I think one other thing is the last part of this is once you have the favorites, you can add that to your front page, your home page, where you can see all the favorites that you've added to your database, and that's what you have right here. So I can go ahead briefly and show how you do that, but it's pretty simple. The same way that you did the way that you plugged in your movies when you queried the API. So essentially what I did right here is I just had a method called load favorites, and it just makes a query. So this is also where I use the query method right here. So you just supply the content URI to the table, and then you just query that database. And then from there, you just loop through each part of the database, and then just get all the individual pieces of data. So what I did is I created an individual list, an individual array list, or I believe I did an array for each column in the database. And for each array, you just have all the different pieces of data. And then using that ID for the array, you can create, you can pull all that stuff and then populate the user interface from the arrays that you have in this information. And so what I have in the populate UI, I use the same method for both querying the API and querying the database, but you're just going to call all the information from the array and then just plug it into the user interface. So you have all the different information like the title, the description, and you plug that in to the poster, and then you just add it to the poster, the grid layout you have for the poster. And yeah, I believe that's all the different requirements for project 3. Does anyone have any questions or anything?
I think you answered all the questions I have. I have never seen this thing laid out in such simplistic terms. I was kind of lost after I've created a data. I have a database helper class too, and then I, created a table, and I was and I have a content provider, and I wasn't sure after that. So I think you've set me on a great path to finish this pretty quickly, actually.
Awesome. Yeah, I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, and let me know if you have any questions. If you're still stuck, definitely reach out to me. You can find me on Slack. And I posted a link to my GitHub repo. So if you want to just take a look at that again and just kind of go through the code really at your own pace, that's also.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what I'll do, I'll cite that when I turn it in. I mean, I'm not gonna. My database helper is pretty much. I'm looking at yours right now, and it's pretty much the same thing, but it looks like I added a bunch of stuff I didn't need to. But anyway, that's really awesome. I appreciate it.
No problem. Yeah, one thing I realized making this project is that a lot of tutorials out there, just based on the project that they had, they had to add a bunch of extra stuff. that we don't need for the requirements for this project. So it can be a little confusing sometimes when you have all this extra stuff that you're really not sure why it's there. Or, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad this helps. I'm just glad to help out. So, yeah.
Yeah, super good walkthrough. I appreciate it. I think I hear my kids in the background, so I'm gonna sign off, and I will let you know as I wrap up my content provider and move on how it's going. If I need help, I appreciate it.
Sure. Awesome. So, you want any questions, or if not, we can go ahead and I think I'll sign off after that. But yeah, if anyone has any other specific inquiries or anything, feel free to reach out. And if not, I'm gonna go ahead and log off. So yeah, thanks to everyone, by the way. Thanks for tuning in. It's been really awesome just kind of working with you guys. So